Hello, I'm Nan Simonson. As the author of Aging Powerfully and as a health and lifestyle coach with Lifestyle Medical in Riverside, California, I have had 4 years of working with patients, and I have for 4 years focused on the value of lifestyle as medicine, as well as my desk pounding recommendation that the best way for humans to eat, and this is backed by the College of Lifestyle Medicine and many, many, many studies, a plethora of studies, is that a whole food plant based, plant forward, plant exclusive, if you can handle that, which I have for 4 years, is the best way to go. But I'm not talking about food today. I'm talking about another lifestyle addition that can make all the difference in a person's life, and that is in habits. The secret and the power of habits. And I'm going to be primarily quoting from and referring to a author and a speaker that I was listening to as he and Rich Roll, the Rich Roll podcast, were discussing his book, but also what he has come to become an expert in, and that is James Clear and Rich Roll in the Rich Roll podcast called Atomic Habits. This also happens to be the name of the book. James Clear is an author, speaker, expert on behavior change, whose work has been used by teams in the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, and he's the author of New York Times best-selling book, Atomic Habits, and he is one of the top authors with one of the top books across the board on Amazon, and you can get the book for less than $20. So I recommend paying attention to this podcast, paying attention to this book, but I'm going to give you a shortened version of it, many times quoting him. First of all, what is a habit? A habit is a behavior that is performed enough times to become more or less automatic. Another way to look at it is that as we go through life, there are problems. And by problems, I don't mean situations that bring us illness and destruction. I mean, there are challenges, such as in the beginning of our years of learning coordination, the tying of shoes. Well, those were a problem. Our brain didn't know what to do with that. Our fingers didn't follow. But with enough repetition, determination, that tying of shoes became a habit to the degree that we do it automatically and probably can't even tell what we've done to make that knot until we sort of take it backwards and dissect it. That's a habit. Every action you take is a vote for the kind of person, and this is the seminal, I'll say, message here in what I'm explaining, and that is, and I'll read that sentence again, every action that you take is a vote for the kind of person that you think you are. That is the true reason why habits are important. This shapes your self-image and what you believe about who you are. Every behavior, every habit has multiple outcomes across time. What we repeat daily or regularly will dictate and direct what and who we will be. Many good habits can have immediate detrimental, I won't say effect, but appearance, to which we may ascribe a negative response. For example, I'm running, and it's hot, and I'm sweating, and I'm not as strong as I was the other day, and this is no fun, and is this getting me anywhere? That's a good habit that can have an immediate detrimental effect. A bad habit can have an immediate beneficial response. Ooh, I'm eating an apple fritter. I've got this great cup of creamy coffee. This tastes so good that my brain has just lit up like New Year's Eve fireworks. And yet the downside of that is, I was going to say misery in all forms. It would be if that were regularly practiced, and yet that run, which felt so uncomfortable when it began, can lead to a habit that can change physiology, change attitude, and also change destiny. Long-term example of this, and I'll again use myself. When I do a run that's 4 to 5 miles, I'll be very glad I did the run before that. That was 3.5 miles. And when I do my 7 to 8 mile run in preparation for a half marathon, which is 13.11 miles next month, I'll be really glad I did all of those. So those actions that are based on who it is we see ourselves as, who it is that we either want to be or that we are living the life of, those actions can start out, because they become ingrained as a habit, as simply an action that we're falling into, but again, that can shape our lives and again, shape our future in terms of the way we see ourselves long term. A good strategy is to find a way to feel and acknowledge the negative outcomes of the bad habits long term. To understand, for example, with that donut, what it does to our metabolism immediately, what it does to our body downside immediately, whether or not we feel it. Acknowledge what that is, acknowledge how the habit, once played out, becomes very easy to play out again and again, and then becomes something that we have a hard time stopping. And to feel and embrace the benefits of the good habits, to have that have the long-term payout. Another perspective is to take the negative and the positive judgments away from these habits and see them as which can create stress and which can make us label ourselves as opposed to the behavior in a negative way and hurt our self-image. A better way might be to see them as behaviors to outcomes, leaving judgment behind, making decisions based on what we want in the long term and what we want to avoid in the long term as well. Yet another way to label them would be behaviors that serve you and behaviors that limit, inhibit, or somehow harm us. So we get our judgment of the habits out of the way. And when starting a habit, watch out for something that's called paralysis analysis. What does that mean? Overthinking, overplanning, overspeculating, rather than simply doing an action. As Rich Roll, David Goggins, who, if you know about this Navy SEAL, who is also an Army Ranger, who is also a paratrooper, who is also the only man that has taken top ranks in, or top positions in every one of the armed forces, just to prove to himself he could, and Dr. Andrew Huberman, who is a doctor of neurobiology and ophthalmology at Stanford University, as they all say and have said in talks that I have heard them repeat again and again in terms of this, that movement trumps motivation. In other words, we decide who we're going to be, who we are, what it is we want to become. We understand and define the habits behind those successes, the habits necessary to form that identity and allow it to play out. And we start the movement, that is the habit, before we ever expect to feel the motivation. When we understand it that way, then we allow ourselves to be inspired by those long-term and eventual benefits. But we need to find reward, even short term, to be willing to even pick up a habit. An important step is to decide upon the person that you want to be and then drill down on the habits and behaviors that reinforce them. And then it becomes all about the process and the journey. And again, the journey will have everything to do with habits. Every great achievement is about small habits. And this is what surprised people about James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. Atomic Habits sounds like he is going to recommend monumental changes. As a matter of fact, the secondary title in this book is, let me pull that up again. Oh, man. I'm sorry. I wanted to say this to you. I'll get to that later. It's how to adopt the habits that you want to fulfill your life. I'm totally paraphrasing. And how to leave behind the habits that are creating the opposite in your life. So every great achievement is about small habits, not necessarily grandiose ones. Atomic habits, in his mind, are the ones that are small enough, bite-sized enough, that allow you to feel comfort in taking them on and not overwhelmed by the challenge. Little, sometimes imperceptible things that are done on a daily basis can ultimately trump any big move that is showy in the beginning and yet doesn't have staying power. Habits are at the foundation of mastery in any area. The little tiny habits become habitualized and then become the foundation for some of the bigger moves that are at the core of accomplishment. James and Rich Roll referred to this as creating an autopilot underneath the more sophisticated actions. What we're looking for here is behaviors that become built in to who we are. It then becomes who we are at our core. So again, creating habits that are ritualized to the degree that at the end, the behavior is simply second nature. The way too simplistic but easy to point to example is the tying of shoes, which when some of us were really small was quite a habit. Was quite a challenge. There are good habits and there are bad habits, but perhaps it's better to consider removing the judgment and thinking of them, again, as habits that serve and habits that harm us. Question: what's the best form of exercise? What both of these gentlemen would say is the one that we will do. We're not necessarily hardwired to take on a monumental switch that causes us great discomfort, unless, of course, it's life or death, or the benefit is so necessary and so obvious that we'll jump at it and we'll override the discomfort. An important distinction is not to have a victim mentality here. In other words, that I deserve this punishment kind of mentality. And behave, in which case we behave and we change for the wrong reasons and eventually feel resentment. Ownership must be taken of our actions or lack of. Our behaviors and our habits need to be something that come from within with a vision that gives them purpose and value. And true habits, in other words, change our identity if we carry them on long enough in one way or another. It's not the fact, I'll use myself as an example, I decided in my mid-70s that I was going to run a 10K race. Well, what I realized after I registered is, oh, Nan, to run a 10K race, you have to become a runner. So I got an app, Runkeeper, There were directives as to what I should do in a sequential manner, and I began doing them, although I had never run. And running even halfway down the block left me feeling miserable. But I started it in that way. In other words, sequential actions that have become a habit. I run 4 times a week, no matter what, because that's part of what the runner in me does that got me through the first 10K, then the second 10K in second place. And I've run 6.2 miles for a 10K. I've run that again and again now because I'm practicing. I have to do that every week now because I'm practicing for 1 month from now, as I said earlier, for a half marathon, which is 13 miles, and I've got to add on more mileage. I've taken this on with with a goal that was big, but it wasn't about seeing the end line before I began establishing habits on a regular basis. 4 times a week I run, 3 times a week I cycle, all with the intention to make my muscles strong enough to be able to carry me. I'll be nearly 72 when I do the half marathon, and that has a lot to do with a mission that I came up with just before turning 70 when I was writing Aging Powerfully, and that mission was that I was going to dedicate myself to help people age powerfully the way we help people at Lifestyle Medicine get past their belief that they now deserve and should be on for the rest of their lives medications and procedures, and find that they can heal themselves through lifestyle choices. Well, I decided, okay, I'm 70. I'm going to decide that I can have another 1, 2, or 3 decades, but I have to then create habits along the way that allow that to happen, or I am going to lose my confidence in the person that I believe I am, and that is a person who can do such a thing. Putting it out there was really smart. I'll ask you a question. What can you put out there? What can you look at in your own life in terms of the identity of the person you want to be? The person who now, in 1 year, in 5 years, in 10 years, you can look at, and it can be completely different than where you are now, by adopting behaviors repetitively that benefit you, which means habits, and choosing to do them, movement before motivation, before you even think about them. And we'll talk a little bit more about some ways to make that a little bit easier. True habit change is identity change. It's not the fact that I can do what I'm doing. It's the fact that I had the identity that then the movement followed because I embraced that identity. There are, according to James Clear, 4 laws to creating a new habit. They are to make it obvious. Look at where you want to go based on that identity, and then come up with what it's going to take to get you there, and fall in love with that process, not the end result. The end result in my life, based on what I just said, may never happen. I could be hit by a bus tomorrow. I could come down with something that surprises the heck out of me in 1 year from now, decades short of my goal. But on the other hand, if those things that I do daily in a number of ways, it's not just the running, it's the eating, it's the other movement, it's the sleep, it's the awareness to stay away from stress, because stress can kill us. Lack of sleep can wipe out our brain cells. Eating the right foods, not the foods that harm us, but the foods that hurt us, that help us. In other words, loving the foods that love us back. If we don't do those things and make habits out of them, repetitive, autopilot habits, that identity we're going for, we will feel an imposter in at some point and will simply give up. And or the lack of habits will leave us feeling less than. So make it obvious. Look at the identity you're looking for and look at what it's going to take to get there. Number 2, make it attractive. It's about the craving. It's about what it's going to be like to feel that you're making it along the way as not just that person, but how enjoyable the actions can be when they are small enough in terms of expectations that you see and feel the rewards every single time. I may run out of the door and not feel that this is going to be a very strong run. I may have days that, it would have been easier not to go, but I don't play into that. My husband and I walk every night for a half an hour. And there are times where I think, boy, it'd be easier just to not do that. And yet, every night, because we expect it of each other, and it is a habit, we get our walking shoes on and we're out the door for a half an hour. And I've never been sorry we did that. What does that mean? It means both of us have a vision of the fact that we are people who exercise and who take care of ourselves. And so we live those habits that ultimately allow us to identify that way. Make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and we'll talk about each of these, and then make it satisfying, and that is the reward. I'm not going to spend time talking about changing bad habits because you're going to hear me say, and I'll say it right now, the good habits quite often crowd out the bad. And their interview was over 2 hours, and I'm going to try to keep this down to, where am I now? I'll try to keep this down to 45 minutes or just a little bit longer. If I could cut it shorter, I would. So, but I will say the 4 laws of breaking bad habits, or what we can call unsatisfactory outcome behaviors, is to make the cue invisible. In other words, get out of your sight line the thing that tempts you to do the thing that you don't want to do. Smoking would be a good example of that. Don't hang around with a bunch of smokers. Drinkers, don't hang around in bars, things like that. Even though we're not talking about addiction here, we're talking about habits. Addictions can be a little more challenging, and they do talk about that in the podcast. Make it unattractive, make it difficult to play it out, make it unsatisfying, unsatisfactory, meaning that you don't like the outcomes, and those outcomes motivate you to not repeat them. But we're going to talk more about building habits here. The best strategy is environmental design. The best strategy to start with. Restructure your environment to make the cues for good habits obvious ones, to make the healthy choice the easy choice, as Dan Buettner, who is the author of The Blue Zones and speaks in terms of the longest living communities of people anywhere. He has restructured cities and gotten outcomes of large percentages of change in entire populations by making the healthy choice the easy choice, putting fruit stands on every corner. I'm exaggerating, that's not what he does, as opposed to 7-Elevens with nothing but the things that'll ruin us health-wise. Again, I'm putting those words there, but that's what he's talking about. And to make the bad cues invisible. So to make it obvious, to be fit, you're going to want gym clothes, you're going to want gym shoes, you're going to want to have those clean and available, or dirty and available. If it's a run, it doesn't matter, you're usually on your own. James spoke of a habit that he wanted to follow through on and was having a real hard time remembering, and that was flossing. He said, I wanted to, because I know the value, knew the value of flossing every time I brushed my teeth, which was 2 times a day, but I kept forgetting. And he said part of it was because I didn't like the way the floss felt wrapped around my fingers, and part of it was that I just had it in a drawer and I didn't think about it. So he said I decided to change the environment. I took a bowl. Instead of the finger floss or the floss that you pull out and wrap around your finger, I got the little floss sticks, and I left that next to my to the sink on the bathroom, or next to the sink in the bathroom. And he said that has become not only a habit, it's what I do twice a day and have for 5 years now. It was just a matter of changing the environment. Imagine being in an environment that has positive cues in 100 little ways that allow you to adopt positive and healthy habits, or inversely tempt you in 100 different ways toward bad habits. Willpower is not something you can depend on. So you can look at your environment. Look at, for example, if you want to change your diet, why wouldn't you? To having more of the foods that take care of your health as opposed to are detrimental, and get those things out of the kitchen. My friend Chef AJ says if it's in your house, eventually it's in your mouth. Just get them out of there. And I think that's very wise advice. Dan Buettner, as I said, has redesigned entire cities with this premise to keep the easy choice, the healthy choice. I just got back from a couple of weeks in Canada, and in Calgary, the city has been designed for health, and there are bike rental places everywhere. There are bike paths everywhere. It is a beautiful city to meander through, and they did that on purpose for the health of their citizens. All right, number 2, make it attractive. Behaviors that attract us are quite often dependent on the people who are around us, and this was a good part of that discussion that I'm honing in on. And those people are our tribe. We are tribal people. We want to belong. Sometimes we'll make bad choices for our health because the people that we hang with make those choices. We'd rather do the wrong thing for ourselves in order to get the benefit of being part of the tribe. Well, create new tribes. When you go to the gym, you see certain people at the gym all the time. They become a kind of a tribe. When I cycle, for example, this morning, there were 4 people that I actually had short conversations with as I'm riding around the lake after riding down the river bottom for my ride, my 1-hour ride that I take on Wednesdays as well as Saturdays and Sundays. And they are part of my tribe. They know that I cycle, they know I'm a runner, and we had conversations about other things as well, including one of the other people in the tribe, a 91-year-old woman who fell and broke her hip, but she is, hanging in there, and we know we'll see her again soon, but we wanted to discuss her. You can find tribes that will support wherever you're going, and if you don't, a recommendation would be to do what I do, and that is find podcasts that are highlighting the things you believe. I believe in the value of a whole food, plant-based, and lifestyle as medicine lifestyle. And all I have to do in the morning is pick up my phone, go to YouTube, and I'm going to see the people that I listen to and the production of any new number of podcasts. And while I'm running, that's my gift to myself. While I'm running or while I'm cycling, I'm listening and I'm educating myself. That's a tribe. I know I'm heading in the direction of the person that I see myself being and becoming. That old lady who is aging powerfully and can help others do the same. And I know I'm heading in that direction even when I'm surrounded by people doing exactly the opposite, because I have found a tribe, even if it means it's in my ears in the morning from a podcast. You can do the same thing. Make it easy. decrease the number of steps between you and the good habit, and increase the number of steps between you and any habit that you want to move away from. Instead of determination and grit, you can create a setup where it's easy to do the things that benefit you in the long run, and where you don't have to work hard at it. A more sustainable and gentle solution. Prime your environment to make the default option easier. For example, to get a better night's sleep, there's something called sleep hygiene. You do things like turn down the lights throughout the house an hour or two before you go to bed. Don't watch exciting and stimulating television right before you're trying to go to sleep. Turn down the temperature in the room, maybe blackout shades, maybe shades, or the eye shades, if the light is in your room earlier than you want it to be, so that you can sleep long enough to get a good 8 hours of sleep. Going to bed at the same time every night helps your sleep. That's part of sleep hygiene. Getting out first thing in the morning and getting at least 5 minutes of light, ambient light, not in the house, but from the sun. Don't glare at the sun. That sets your circadian rhythm. That is a habit that actually then allows your body, through the pineal gland, to start producing melatonin 12 to 13 hours later to get you ready for sleep the next night. So there are habits that we would perform in order to get the results that we want. When we take the time to understand and define those habits. So prime your environment. James suggests the idea of scaling habits down and first mastering the art of showing up. This was interesting. This big well-known baseball player, which is what James Clear was, and then he got his master's degree in behavior, and he has become a very well-respected, as I said, speaker and the author of this, again, best-selling book. And yet, he's talking about not going out there and hitting it out of the park. He said that is not sustainable. We probably won't do that, and the people that do that are the people that have probably had hundreds and hundreds of hours of practice that are unidentifiable except through the actions that become autopilot to them, that lead to what looks so easy as hitting a ball out of the park. James suggests scaling habits down, first mastering the art of showing up, taking even the first 2 minutes of whatever the habit you'd like to become adept at, and playing that out. He gives the example here of a man who, through reading his book, lost 100 pounds. And he did it by paying attention to this dictate. I'm going to first master the art of showing up. So he showed up at the gym for 6 weeks every day, but only worked out for 5 minutes and then left. But as he mastered that, he then mastered the feeling of what it feels like to show up when you say you're going to do something you say you're going to do. And then he started adding more foundational things to that. And the more things that we add that are healthy, the easier it is to bundle it with other things that are healthy. Make it satisfying, and that is the reward. You really need to make it immediately satisfying and rewarding. The manifestation of that is the reinforcement of your desired identity. An example of that would be the determination to lose, let's say, 30 pounds, and you don't see that change, but you're reinforced, not immediately, but you're reinforced by the knowledge that that workout you're doing at least 3 times a week is leading you to better habits, to showing up, and to being that person who works out 30 minutes or 3 times a week, knowing that someday those results will come. The reinforcement in that case becomes immediate. That's what getting habits to stick looks like. Rich Roll described this as optimizing and focusing on the starting line, not the finishing line. He said many people completely overestimate what they can do in a day and then burn themselves out before they even start, and very much underestimate what they can do in a long-term window. And he said, I mean, not just months or years, but maybe even increments of 5 years. They underestimate how these habits, little habits, can change who and what they are and the trajectory of their entire life. This takes clear understanding that, again, it's about the habit or about the identity. Who you are, who you see yourself becoming, and keeping a firm grasp on certain behaviors that lead to that end result. And then trusting the process. This is who I am. This is the person that I am, the person that does these things. These things will lead someday to where I'm going and who I will become. James says that the cardinal rule for behavior change is that the behaviors are immediately rewarded and are going to stick. In other words, we see value immediately. And the value, again, is the fact that it's reinforcing that you are that person that's going to do that. We're not looking at the long-term goal. We're looking at the goal being that you are doing that activity. And behaviors that get immediately punished or avoided as the adverse to that. Your brain acknowledges the positive reinforcement, and your neurotransmitters, meaning your brain chemicals, are set up to want to repeat that. Positive emotions reinforce habits, and negative emotions destroy them. So you want to find a way to feel good and feel successful as soon as you finish whatever it is you're doing. Honor momentum and understand the value of any forward pace in the long haul. Every one of us knows what happens when we're doing something that was, we thought, beneficial, that had become, we thought, a habit, and yet we let the momentum slide. Some things sometimes that we do for quite a period of time, and that then we let go, and that then we never get back to again. The way James describes this is, he said, when there's a slip up, all habits will lead to this eventually. He says, I have a rule. I may miss once, but I won't miss twice. Now, this may mean different things to different people. He may not mean literally, I'm not going to miss that twice, because sometimes you're in a situation that does happen on a schedule that is otherwise rather tightly bound with habits that you're trying to reinforce. It's the spiral of several mistakes that can derail a person. He said, missing, this is kind of a tough stance. Missing once is a mistake. Missing twice is the beginning of a new habit. That's a good one. One thing to understand about good habits and the adoption of them is, just like the adoption of more and more healthy foods, they can crowd out bad habits, and they make other good habits more appealing. They come in bundles. I know that I'm a person who's adopted the mission for aging powerfully, and so I have this bundle of things that I do that my friends will say, my gosh, you really do what you say you're going to do. And yeah, I don't do it to impress anyone. I do it because I'm the person that does these things that allow me to be healthy, that allow me to continue to do things that possibly I wouldn't be able to do, and I wouldn't have been able to do had I not made these changes in my life 4 years ago. There are simple keystone habits that tend to be practiced by many very successful people, such as going for a walk every day. I go for a walk every day. Things like meditation. And again, this can be any length of time to start with. You might even start with 2 to 5 minutes of quieting your mind and just paying attention to your breath. Visualization, taking the time to see it and feel it in advance of it ever becoming your reality. Paying off debt was one that he mentioned. Taking that pressure off yourself that is always lingering as a shroud, and starting to put ourselves in a position where we feel what I call financial freedom. Invaluable tool is to have a progress checking system. For example, a calendar where every time you show up at the gym, or every time you do something that you intend to do, study for that Spanish class that you decided that because you're the person who is going to be bilingual. I am the person who is ultimately going to be bilingual. You do certain things like taking classes and practicing. And one thing that can keep you going and motivated is to use a calendar and check off what you've done and when you've done it. Because looking at things like that can give you a feeling of accomplishment and as visual reinforcement. The central point here is to find small ways to feel good in the moment and giving you a reason to repeat that in the future. Also create a reward system around what could be seen as avoiding a bad habit, for example, or a reward system that allows you to bundle a good habit around a bad habit. I'll use Chef AJ and if you don't know who she is one of the most preeminent people in the whole food plant-based world. And she's helped people lose massive amounts of weight, and she does cooking classes, and she has interviewed people in this space 1,300 and something times since we were shut down from COVID in March. I think it was March 20th of 2020. In any case, Chef AJ, who never liked to exercise, gets on her spin bike 1 hour every day. And she does that because that's the only way she allows herself to watch Netflix. Isn't that a great idea? And that's called bundling. To find what works for you, you need to be willing to experiment. In other words, what is a habit I'm willing to do that might even be on the razor's edge of just enough but not too much, that will keep me coming back, keep me motivated, but make it very clear that I am accomplishing what it takes to do to become the person I see myself as or becoming. This may be an extreme example, but if you've read the book or you're familiar with the movie, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, the author of that book is Victor Hugo, and he was given a commission by a publisher to write this book, to write a novel. And he got his advancement, and he had a lot of friends who were celebrating with him, and he sort of never stopped celebrating. He had people over all the time. He was going out to restaurants all the time, and bottom line, he wasn't writing. And at one point, the publisher said, after months and months of a lack of progress, they said, we may end up canceling our contract with you. And he realized he had to get serious. So he had somebody come in and take all the clothes out of his living space and bring it down to sort of a bare nothing. And he had a shawl, and he had no accoutrements there other than for personal sustenance. And he couldn't have people over in that case. He couldn't go out in that case. And in, we'll call it record time, well before it was due, he wrote the prize-winning novel, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. So taking extremes that appear to be extremes like that are examples of what some people will do to get themselves to do a thing that they otherwise wouldn't do. He was a writer. He needed to write. He accepted that responsibility. He had developed bad habits along the way, and this got him to get back into a good habit, whether or not it was a forced habit, it got him what he wanted. So goals, are goals what we're talking about? Well, they might be useful to set a direction, but after that, you need to set up systems and habits, and that's what we're talking about here. Most people speak of and focus on goals and outcomes, but they lose that necessary fundamental step of the scaffolding underneath that, and that is the habits we're talking about today. James says that goals are necessary, but not sufficient. It's simply the starting point. The process and the systems are what it is that are key here. Making a goal is a one-time thing. It's a process, and yet setting up habits and feeling the pride of having those happen on a regular basis are the thing that then puts us on the trajectory of not only self-improvement and self-identity and self-sufficiency and self-respect, but also helps create a future that is, in many cases, unexpected, because it's quite surprising how far we can go when we can follow up on a regular basis, even in a small way. Rich Roll asked James, where do most people go wrong with all of this? And James Clear said, by making the habit too big. So in other words, the pressure's off here. Keep in mind the 2-minute rule, also that all or nothing mentality can end up robbing us of forward movement, because we end up finding that it's too much for us to go with. What can stand in the way most is the social identity sometimes, and our feeling that we're leaving our friends behind or they're leaving us behind, in which case we keep our habits going, but we find others that can identify with that, and we allow ourselves several tribes, one of which will help us go where we're willing and determined to go. So how do we start? Look at getting even 1% better every day. If you eat a salad instead of a burger and fries, you're not going to see the difference today or even tomorrow, but the difference will absolutely become apparent ultimately. That 1% better every day becomes a habit. The expression of that every day becomes a habit that will get you, as I said, further than you ever expected. Also, automate the beginning of a behavior. How can you do that and then do that again and again and again? He calls that his 2-minute rule. Just show up. Just show up for it every time. Do less than you think is necessary to get a difference, if that's what it takes, but just show up and do what it will take to take you into the direction that you want to go, and that habit is dependent upon. Our goal is to make sure that we get a multiplication and a multiplying of these things. So those are the words I wanted to share with you from what I heard today. The conversation between them was long. They could have spoken for hours. His book is much, much more complex than that. But the lesson, again, back to what we began with, is that it begins with who we see ourselves as. It begins with our identity. The habits then are there to satisfy the identity by the realization that we're moving in that direction at any given speed, but that we are indeed moving in that direction, and that person will ultimately be us. I hope you got something out of this. I hope you're having a great day, because I know I am. Remember to give me a thumbs up, because that's important, and subscribe. Consider reading Aging Powerfully. It's an interesting book. There's some memoir in there, and I think that's that. Bye. Thank you for joining me.